Long before Scotland became synonymous with ancient clans and aristocrats with names etched in stone, a quiet revolution was already brewing. It didn't start in boardrooms or castles. It started in the bellies of crowded ships, with shaking hands gripping beat-up suitcases. These were families running for their lives, carrying nothing but grit. What if I told you that some of Scotland's biggest business titans weren't born into old money at all? They were Jewish refugees who showed up with zero and spotted gold where everyone else just saw dirt. This isn't just a story about accumulating cash. It is about outsiders becoming the architects of a whole nation's economy. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, waves of Jewish families hit Scottish shores, running from pogroms and violence across Europe. They landed in spots like the Gorbals and Glasgow neighborhoods, famous for being poor, packed, and brutal. But inside those tight tenements, they had a mindset you couldn't break. Survive first, then build. While other people wrote them off as hopeless immigrants, these folks were quietly pouring the concrete for industries that would define Scotland. We are talking retail giants, whiskey dynasties, textile rings, and manufacturing powerhouses. They mixed old-school Jewish values, education, discipline, and community with straight-up Scottish hustle and global trade smarts. The result? A cultural mashup that built some of the most dominant empires Scotland has ever seen. Tonight, you are about to pull back the curtain on these families. We aren't talking about fairy tales polished up over time. These are real stories about risk, sacrifice, and gut-check decisions that flipped a nation's economy on its head. This is the untold rise of the Scottish Jewish business dynasties. Before we get into the weeds, I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from right now? If you are in the US, drop a 1 in the comments. If you are in the UK, drop a 2. Anywhere else? Hit me with a 3. And if stories about hidden fortunes and secret empires are your thing, smash that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the next drop. Way before massive chains and corporate giants took over the British shopping scene, one sharp mind was figuring out the mechanics of commerce on the meanest streets of Glasgow. Isaac Wolfson was born in 1897 in the Gorbals, a district known for overcrowding and immigrant struggle. His dad was a cabinet maker from Eastern Europe who worked hard, but they were always broke. Isaac learned fast. Survival takes discipline, math, and speed. The kid was a math whiz, but necessity forced him to drop out of school at just 14. The streets became his classroom. He worked as a traveling salesman for his dad's small picture framing gig, going door to door. That is where he learned what makes people tick, what scares them, and what makes them open their wallets. Wolfson developed the instincts that would define his empire right there: precision, efficiency, and an obsession with the numbers. In the 1920s, Wolfson moved to London and started supplying goods to a failing mail-order outfit called Universal Stores. Most investors looked at it and saw a sinking ship. Wolfson saw potential hidden in the mess. He quietly started buying up shares using borrowed cash and absolute faith in his own analysis. By the early 1930s, he was running the show. What happened next blew the business world away. Wolfson trimmed the fat, leveraged assets nobody valued, and bought up companies that were drowning in debt. Within a year, massive losses turned into serious profits. Great Universal Stores exploded in size, becoming the biggest mail-order business in Europe and reaching millions of British homes. From a kid in the Gorbals to a retail kingpin, Wolfson proved that strategic thinking could turn scarcity into total dominance. In Scotland, whiskey is not just a drink. It is identity, heritage, and economic power in a bottle. While the big Scottish names get all the glory in the history books, one of the smartest chapters in the Scotch game was written by two Jewish brothers who understood timing better than tradition. Maurice and Joseph Bloch didn't inherit distilleries. They bought their way in when the industry was crashing. Back in the early 20th century, Scotch whiskey was in trouble. The Depression, tanking demand, and closed factories left historic brands on death's door. Everyone else saw ruin. The Bloch brothers saw a once-in-a-generation fire sale. Working out of Glasgow as blenders and brokers, they started snapping up distressed distilleries with patience and precision. They knew that heritage assets sell for pennies on the dollar when panic rules the market. Their biggest plays happened in Campbelltown and the Orkney Islands, where they grabbed Glen Scotia and Scapa distilleries. These weren't just factories, they were cultural icons. By saving them, the blocks weren't just building a portfolio, they were protecting history. Their main blend, Ambassador, became a huge hit, especially in the American market, proving they could hang with the big dogs on a global stage. By 1941, they were official, and the block name meant survival in the whiskey trade. Even after they sold the company to a giant international spirits group in the 1950s, the family turned around and bought Glen Scotia back shortly after. That is a rare move. It showed this was about more than just profit. It was about stewardship. The Block brothers did exactly what outsiders weren't supposed to do. They stepped into one of Scotland's most traditional clubs and left a permanent mark. They didn't try to change the industry's soul. They just saved it when it was on life support. Before retail empires and whiskey dynasties reshaped the Scottish economy, another industry was quietly keeping thousands of immigrant families alive: tobacco. At the center of this overlooked world stood Jacob Kamush. He was an Austrian Jewish industrialist, but his influence wasn't measured by brand names. It was measured by the lives he stabilized and the futures he unlocked. At the turn of the 20th century, Glasgow was a global heavyweight in tobacco manufacturing. As waves of Jewish refugees flooded in from Eastern Europe, many didn't speak English, had zero capital, and were facing total desperation. Tailoring and street hawking were hit or miss, but tobacco factories offered something way more valuable: stability. Jacob Kamush ran some of the biggest operations in the city, and for fresh arrivals, his factories were a lifeline. This wasn't just a paycheck. It was integration. Inside Kamush's walls, you heard Yiddish spoken right alongside English. Cultural bonds stayed tight, and trust replaced isolation. A steady job meant the rent was paid, the kids got educated, and maybe there was a shot at starting a business down the line. A lot of the shop owners and retailers who defined Scottish Jewish success later on started their journey right there on Kamush's factory floor. Kamush understood something critical: wealth without community is fragile. His businesses didn't exist in a bubble. They were the engine for a whole population trying to find their footing. While his name never became a household brand, his impact rippled out for generations. The small shops and firms that popped up later, they were built on the foundation he poured. Jacob Kamush represents the invisible architecture of success, the layer underneath the empires. His story proves that the most powerful businesses aren't always the famous ones. They are the ones that create an opening exactly when people need it most. Not every Jewish family that shaped Scotland built massive factories or retail chains. Some built their influence through craftsmanship, taste, and precision. The Heilbronn family represents a quieter kind of power, one rooted in expertise and reputation rather than just scale. Their story shows how having cultural class can be just as valuable as having money in the bank. David Heilbronn showed up in Glasgow from the Netherlands in the late 1800s. But unlike refugees running from danger, he came ready to play. He brought commercial skills and connections refined through European trade networks. He set up shop as a wine merchant, cigar importer, and producer of high-end drinks, supplying a growing Scottish upper class that was hungry for refinement. David Heilbronn and Sons quickly became the go-to name for trust and sophistication. They weren't selling necessities, they were selling luxuries. That distinction was huge. It put the family right at the intersection of taste and business, letting them work out of fancy city offices instead of factory floors. Later, they expanded into whiskey, making respected labels that mixed Scottish tradition with international flair. But it wasn't just about sales. The Heilbronn family got deeply involved in civic life. David was a major community leader and philanthropist. Later generations moved effortlessly between business, politics, and the arts. His son, Michael Simons, served in local government and helped launch major cultural institutions, reinforcing the idea that making money came with a responsibility to the city. The Heilbronn story breaks the mold of the poor immigrant narrative. It highlights a different path taken by skilled, educated Jewish merchants who helped elevate Scotland's commercial sophistication. Their success wasn't built on volume. It was built on credibility. And in business, credibility compounds quietly, but it never stops working. By the 1970s, the Jewish business scene in Scotland had shifted gears. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about scale. And honestly, few modern names capture that evolution better than Slater Menswear. We aren't talking about some dusty inherited empire or a nostalgic trip down memory lane. This was a calculated reinvention built on old-school skills, executed with modern precision. Philip Slater wasn't just inheriting a business, he was inheriting a legacy. His dad had fled Nazi Germany, and his grandfather was a master tailor. Textiles and tailoring were practically woven into his DNA, but he knew tradition alone wouldn't cut it. In 1973, Slater took the reins of the family clothing business and made a bold move. He scrapped the small-scale model and rebuilt the brand from the ground up, renaming it Slater Menswear. His concept was deceptively simple. Offer an inventory nobody else could touch, killer prices, and here's the kicker, in-house tailoring that fixed the friction points customers hated. Free alterations became the brand's signature, a direct nod to the tailoring trades that once kept Jewish immigrants afloat in Glasgow. What used to be a niche craft was now being deployed at a mass scale. The result? Explosive growth. Starting with a single shop in Glasgow, Slater Menswear spread rapidly across Scotland and pushed into England. The stores became destinations, famous for massive stockrooms and service-driven loyalty. Customers didn't just walk out with a suit. They walked out with a sense of efficiency, confidence, and trust, all in one transaction. Slater's genius wasn't about ditching tradition, it was about translating it. He took the core values of craftsmanship, precision, and customer care and applied them to modern retail economics. In the process, he proved that heritage, when you adapt it strategically, can outperform trend-chasing business models. Slater Menswear stands as a bridge between generations, carrying that immigrant enterprise spirit right into the modern era. Not every empire starts with one founder or a famous last name. Some are built by the crowd through repetition, discipline, and skills passed quietly from one generation to the next. That was exactly the story with the Jewish cabinet makers of the Gorbals, a community of craftsmen whose work furnished Scotland and sharpened the minds that would go on to build much bigger enterprises. When Jewish immigrants landed from Eastern Europe, many brought serious woodworking chops with them. Back in their home villages, cabinet making was a high-status trade requiring patience, precision, and long apprenticeships. Glasgow, which was in the middle of an aggressive housing boom, offered exactly what they needed: demand. New apartment buildings needed furniture, and the Gorbals became the epicenter of the industry. Small workshops filled up basements and back rooms. Fathers trained sons. Brothers worked shoulder to shoulder. Quality was everything because, in tight-knit communities, word travels fast. Over time, Jewish cabinet maker became shorthand for craftsmanship in Glasgow. These workshops hired fellow immigrants, built supply chains, and circulated money within the community, creating an economic ecosystem long before that was even a buzzword. But this trade did more than just produce tables and chairs. It produced entrepreneurs. The discipline of pricing raw materials, managing labor, negotiating sales, and maintaining standards turned these shops into informal business schools. Solomon Wolfson, the father of Isaac Wolfson, was just one of many cabinet makers whose small operation became a training ground for future ambition. Few of these workshops grew into national brands, but their collective impact was massive. They formed the backbone of Jewish economic mobility in Scotland. From these workbenches and toolkits emerged salesmen, retailers, and industrialists who understood value at its most fundamental level: something well made, sold honestly, and delivered on time. Before the crowded tenements of the Gorbals became the center of Jewish life in Scotland, an earlier, quieter wave of entrepreneurs had already laid the groundwork. These were German-speaking Jewish merchants who arrived in the mid-19th century, drawn not by desperation, but by opportunity. Their influence would shape Scotland's global trade long before mass immigration really kicked off. Glasgow and Dundee were booming industrial powerhouses, running on textiles, shipping, and international commerce. The German Jewish merchants who settled there brought something rare to the table: fluency in global markets. They understood finance, logistics, and cross-border trade, using family connections across Europe to link Scottish mills to the wider world. In Dundee, the heart of the jute industry, these merchants were foundational. They acted as agents, exporters, and financiers, ensuring Scottish textiles actually reached markets far beyond Britain. Their businesses operated right at the intersection of manufacturing and diplomacy, navigating currencies, contracts, and political uncertainty with precision. Through them, Scotland's industrial output went truly international. These families were also the original community builders. They established some of Scotland's first formal Jewish congregations, charities, and synagogues, creating a stable foundation for the arrivals who would come later. Often middle-class and well-educated, they integrated smoothly into Scottish commercial life while still holding on to their religious and cultural identity. Their legacy often goes unnoticed because they operated behind the scenes. They were connectors rather than producers, architects of networks rather than factories. Yet without them, later waves of Jewish entrepreneurs would have faced a much steeper climb. The German Jewish merchants were the bridge between Scotland and the global economy, proving that influence doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it simply moves the trade. In an age obsessed with scaling up, algorithms, and global reach, one small business in Glasgow proves that real power can also come from cultural gravity. Mark's Deli isn't a multinational giant, yet it carries a weight few corporations ever achieve. For Scotland's Jewish community, it's not just a shop, it's an anchor. Owned by Mark Cohen, Mark's Deli represents 4 generations of family enterprise, rooted in food, tradition, and continuity. Long before supermarkets made everything convenient, Mark's ancestors were feeding a community that ran on trust. His great-aunt ran a kosher deli in the Gorbals. Another relative ran a beloved kosher restaurant that became a social hub. His mother, Doreen, was a legendary kosher caterer. In this family, food was never just calories. It was identity. Today, Scotland's Jewish population is just a fraction of what it used to be. Yet, Mark's Deli serves the entire country, shipping kosher food from major cities to the most remote towns. It is Scotland's only kosher deli, and that exclusivity isn't a business tactic, it's a responsibility. During religious holidays, the deli becomes the beating heart of the community, keeping rituals alive that might otherwise fade away. Mark's Deli also embodies cultural fusion. Take their famous kosher haggis, a blend of Jewish dietary laws and Scottish tradition that's been recognized at the highest cultural levels. The business has evolved without abandoning its roots, supplying major international events while maintaining the warmth of a neighborhood institution. In a world where empires are measured in billions, Mark's Deli proves that legacy can be measured in belonging. Its value isn't about expansion, it's about preservation. And sometimes, that is the rarest form of success. The future of Jewish enterprise in Scotland isn't about factories or storefronts anymore, it's about experience, identity, and storytelling. That shift is perfectly embodied by Kosher Scotland Tours, founded by Adam Henderson, a native Glaswegian who turned cultural heritage into a modern business. Henderson spotted a problem most people in tourism missed. Jewish travelers wanted to explore Scotland's castles, highlands, and history, but dietary laws and limited infrastructure made the logistics a nightmare. His solution was elegant. Kosher Scotland offers luxury travel experiences with gourmet kosher food, premium accommodations, and carefully designed itineraries that knock down every barrier. These tours go way beyond sightseeing. They plug visitors back into the hidden Jewish story of Scotland. Guests visit historic synagogues, walk through neighborhoods shaped by immigrant enterprise, and learn how Jewish families helped build key industries. Henderson isn't selling destinations, he's selling meaning. This evolution highlights the deeper lesson behind every family in this story. Success isn't static. It adapts. From cabinet makers and factory workers to retail giants and cultural entrepreneurs, each generation responded to its era while holding on to core values. Discipline, education, community, and responsibility remain constant, even as the industries change. Scotland's experience offers a powerful message. Societies get stronger when opportunity is extended, not restricted. The legacy of Jewish enterprise here proves that welcoming newcomers doesn't dilute identity, it expands it. If these stories shifted your perspective on wealth and influence, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who appreciates hidden history. Comment the number 1 if you want more untold family empires. Comment the number 2 if there's another country or dynasty we should explore next.